They say science moves forward one step at a time. Test, record, repeat. But sometimes it leaps. And when those leaps happen in the wrong place, by the wrong hands, under the wrong flag, they're buried. A place hidden in the middle of wartime colonial Africa, one that claimed it could stop yellow fever dead in its tracks, before anyone else. The only problem? It wasn't funded by a European crown, it wasn't designed by white scientists, and its results didn't fit the narrative of who should save the world. This is the lost truth behind the lab that vanished. Welcome to the Forgotten File. It begins near the banks of the Kwanza River, deep in what was then Portuguese Angola, today a barely documented outpost near Novo Redondo. The world was watching Europe, anticipating war. But in this corner of Central Africa, something else was spreading: fever. A brutal, hemorrhagic wave of yellow fever had struck a dozen villages. It moved with the mosquitoes, yes, but more than that, it seemed to adapt faster than ever seen. No quinine worked. No Western doctor dared stay long enough to document it. Entire communities vanished, bleached skulls under banana leaves. And in the center of it all, working 7 days a week under a rusted aluminum shack, was Dr. Gabriel Diarra, French-Senegalese virologist. A native of Dakar, the first black field-trained medical officer to serve under both the French Pasteur Institute and indigenous healer guilds, holding one foot in modern labs and another in the ancient pharmacopoeia of his grandmother's people. Dr. Diarra was a scientist, but by colonial standards, he was also a problem, too educated to ignore, too native to be trusted. He had been sent to Angola by request, but with no funding, no official backing, and no access to Europe's vaccine stockpiles. Instead, he was given a 3-room hut, 2 local interns, 1 microscope, no phone lines, and 1 medical kit from Lisbon that was already expired. His assistants were Joe Ngola, a teenage fisherman's son who had learned Latin from missionaries, and Maria Lemba, a former traditional birth attendant whose knowledge of local herbs was dismissed as superstition by European press. Together, they built a lab, not to survive, to discover. By June of 1937, the fever had killed over 2,000 people within 60 kilometers. Entire villages were dying faster than could be buried. But Diarra noticed something strange. One tribe, deep along the Kumbara forest edge, was largely untouched, and they weren't using Western remedies. They were burning the leaves of a specific plant, boiling them into smoky infusions, and rubbing pulped roots into wounds. The smell was horrifying, like rotting fruit and sulfur. Diarra risked ostracization by documenting it. He even shipped samples labeled experimental vector inhibitors to a contact in Marseille for lab analysis. That package never arrived. But even without support, something incredible was happening. Villagers treated with the herbal smoke brew didn't get sick, and something else, something inconceivably rare, began appearing in microscope slides. Non-attenuated viral deactivation, meaning the virus wasn't just being resisted, it was being disabled. This was no myth, no placebo. It was a compound that disrupted yellow fever's replication cycle. Diarra didn't sleep for 3 days. They tested it again, then again, same result. But that night, their lanterns were stolen. The next morning, a Portuguese military register officer came to the lab unannounced. He said they were suspending all unofficial medical activity. Too much chatter in Lisbon, the man said coldly. You're not authorized to save people, Maria told Diarra. If we already know how to stop it, why must we wait for permission? But Diarra understood the silence they were being wrapped in. They were a thorn in an invisible side. Their miracle existed in the wrong hands, without French patents, European bottles, or laboratory prestige. And now, he feared they were no longer being ignored. They were being watched. Sunday night, July 4th, 1937. The lab walls shook as boots approached. A convoy of soldiers, faces hidden beneath canvas hats, stepped from a Portuguese troop transport. No explanation, no warrant. Maria hid herb samples under her dress. Joe buried test files in a metal pot beside the latrine. Diarra calmly closed his journal and waited. We're here on royal order, one officer said, and behind them, a European doctor with the armband of the Pasteur Institute. Everything they had built their findings, their hope was carried away in crates by dusk. Within 3 days, the lab was ash. The villagers still dying, no records filed, no articles published. The fever slowed weeks later, strangely. Right when a French pharmaceutical company in Lyon announced it would trial a new yellow fever serum based on an undisclosed plant enzyme. No credit, no mention of Angola, no Diarra, just another patent, another story overwritten. If they burn the building, let them. If they take the vials, let them. But the truth is now in the people. In Maria, in Joao, in these pages, and maybe someday, far from this ash, someone will care enough to read them. That final journal Diarra is only written. Testimonial was smuggled out, wrapped in fish skin, and buried in a wooden crate beneath a drying hut by Joao in Angola. It was rediscovered by accident, nearly 69 years later. Badly water damaged, mostly illegible, and labeled in a forgotten dialect. It now sits in the undigitized archive room of a university in Belgium, simply marked LAB 37, Unverified Experimental Field Notes. They came so close, and then they vanished, not because they failed, but because they succeeded. In the wrong place, at the wrong time, in the wrong skin. This is the forgotten file. Previously, Dr. Gabriel Diarra and his team in 1930s. Angola make a groundbreaking discovery, an indigenous herbal compound that neutralizes yellow fever. But no one wants their miracle. Now, European powers are circling, and the lab is burned to the ground with no explanation. Let's continue. The lab was gone. All that remained were the outlines in the dirt, a few shattered test tubes glinting among the cinders, and the people whose blood had once held proof. Maria Lemba stood barefoot beside what used to be the drying table, her home, her experiments. Destroyed without a single bullet. Not by war, but by something worse. Fear of knowledge outside of their control. It wasn't the fever that had silenced the lab. It was the discovery. Now, as the fires cooled, only 3 people truly knew what had been accomplished, and 2 of them were already being watched. 2 days after the destruction, Dr. Diarra was summoned to the Colonial station at Novo Redondo. His former authorization letter, once stamped by French military medical offices, had been lost in reorganization, his credentials reviewed, his passport held for inspection. Behind their clipped Portuguese courtesy was a clear order. Discredit, disappear, divide. They offered Diarra 2 options. 1, take passage to Europe for reevaluation and reassignment, with the promise of funding and a possible lab role in Lyon under French guidance. 2, stay unsupported and be reported as an illegal practitioner attempting unsanctioned biological interventions. He was being offered a golden leash or a guillotine. But Diarra understood colonial science. He'd seen this pattern before, in the Sudan, in Algeria, even in Senegal. Take indigenous cures, translate them, rename as European serums. Patent, profit. The formula was older than the disease. Worse, he suspected his findings hadn't been destroyed. They'd been copied, couldn't stay. But if he fled alone, everything they had built would vanish from the earth. So Diarra made a decision no scientist makes easily. He would release the cure, not through governments, not through pharmaceutical trials, but through the people. In the weeks that followed, Diarra and Maria began training the sick, the midwives, the shepherds, the cooks. Everyone learned to prepare the smoke baths and root pulp, to treat infection with timetables, and to burn the virus out before it bloomed inside the blood. They passed coded notebooks, teaching villagers even further away, miles beyond French checkpoints, how to recreate the formula without ever writing it down. Maria said it best. They Dante believe in our medicine because they Dante control it. It's where we give it back to the land it came from. By late August 1937, yellow fever deaths in that region had dropped by over 85%. A local pastor wrote quietly to a contact in Kinshasa, "No one has died of the fever in 2 villages now. A root mixture burned with leaves was used, not from any hospital. French soldiers now patrol the forest paths. They do not knock anymore. Diarra knew it wouldn't last. He had made too many enemies, simply by saving lives without permission. That same week, Joe didn't return from a transport run to the coast. They found his donkey days later, still tied to a fence. The boy who learned Latin from missionaries, who planted glass vials under latrines. Joe in Angola was never seen again. No letter, no report, no body. Just another name crossed out by someone who feared what he might remember. Maria never forgave herself for letting him go, and Diarra. I finally agreed to leave Angola. Not for safety, not for recognition, but for one last act of defiance. He would go to Europe, to speak the truth. With a forged pass and help from a coastal priest, Diarra left under a merchant alias, traveling as a cattle disease consultant aboard the SS Belmonte to Marseille. He carried with him a sealed copy of the original test results, a translation log of village data, and a single sealed vial smuggled in a hollowed-out cane handle. What he didn't carry was any trust, because he knew the truth was valuable only until it was inconvenient. Western laboratories had begun publishing speculative summaries of herbal treatments sourced from field scouts. In one paper written in Lyon by a pharmaceutical firm known to supply the French Foreign Legion, a novel inhibitor of hemorrhagic viral replication linked to rainforest alkaloids was being reviewed for clinical trials. No names cited, no origin traced, no mention of Angola. Diarra recognized his own phrase in the abstract, wording pulled verbatim from his destroyed notes. He wasn't just being ignored, he'd already been stolen. He tried to contact his old mentor, blocked. He requested a meeting with French health officials, nothing, but he managed. One victory, a brief appearance before a circle of independent anti-colonial physicians, based in Geneva. There Diarra read aloud every detail of what happened: the disappearance of Joe, the destruction of the lab, the forced collapse of Africa's first self-funded viral breakthrough. The speech lasted 19 minutes. It was published in a newsletter circulated to just 87 subscribers, but it existed, shard of truth, floating in a storm of silence. That same year, France announced the procurement of a major yellow fever vaccine contract, citing breakthroughs in viral deactivation linked to botanical sulfurous inhibitors developed on French soil. The patent sparked a new wave of European pharmaceutical expansion. The African source buried. The African scientists, one gone. The other Maria, still in Angola, now whispered of buy locals as a medicine woman who never slept. And Diarra, thrown into academic darkness. His name left off review boards, denied institution access, relegated to backroom consults, and eventually labeled disruptive. History didn't just forget him, it erased him. In 1952, during a global medical conference celebrating post-war vaccine milestones, Diarra sat watching quietly from a back row. The treatment he pioneered had since saved tens of thousands in West Africa. Newsreels showed smiling children. The narrator called it Europe's gift to Africa. Diarra smiled weakly. He said only 4 words before he left the hall. "We didn't need your gift." They found him years later in a Geneva retirement home. No family, no possessions, and only one item under his bed: the journal he salvaged from Angola. Its final page, written in his own hand, read, "If I could save you again, I would not ask permission." This is the forgotten file. In 2006, almost 7 decades after the disappearance of Dr. Gabriel Diarra, someone finally opened the box that he had hoped would survive. It contained a fish skin-wrapped journal, torn, water-stained, smelling faintly like old ash, root spice, and river silt. The researcher was not looking for this discovery. He was cataloging artifacts for an exhibit on European medical interventions in Africa. But fate doesn't follow exhibits. What he found that day was something entirely erased from the footnotes of medical history. They will take and rename. That much I cannot stop. But if one person learns, it's not just how we saved them, but how we were silenced, then I am still alive in the pages. There was no title on the journal. But inside are chemical formulas, localized patient data, and one phrase repeated 8 times, underlined in red. Lemba formula, not for patent. The researcher, a young Congolese PhD student named Etienne Mukiba, recognized the surname, Lemba. He had heard it once, faintly, in a story his grandmother told as a child. About a woman who cured the river plague with smoke and roots, then vanished into the forest with the ghosts. He realized something no Western professor around him did. This field log was indeed just science. It was proof of theft. ATN began tracing the connection across decades. In 1938, Pasteur Institute published an internal memo about sulfuric alkaloid inhibitors, derived from unknown tropical herbs. No source cited. In 1944, Institut Biologique Francais rolled out a yellow fever serum patented in Paris. With a compound nearly identical to what appeared in Diarra's notes, but with 2 European names listed on the filing, there were no clinical trial records from Angola. As ATN flipped through archives, one phrase came up again and again in red-stamped files. Classified, repurchase rights denied, origin uncertified. What that really meant was, it came from somewhere we can't admit. By now, Maria Lemba was a myth even in rural Angola. Some called her a Midu Vento, the mother of smoke. Others said she cursed invaders with her herbs after they burned her world, but no hospital ever named a ward after her. Universities cited her knowledge, even WHO. Literature on yellow fever vaccines from the 1960s cited only European names, giving partial credit to local remedies and footnotes simply marked unverified tribal practices. Medicine didn't just forget its African origins. It buried them under patents and profits. Diarra and Lemba weren't uneducated. They were inconvenient. ETN tried for 3 years to publish his research on the Lemba protocol and its colonial suppression. Every pitch was rejected as historically incomplete, to speculative, or not academically neutral. He was advised to avoid politicizing pharmacology. Finally, in 2011, after pressure from African medical advocacy groups, he presented the work in a limited session at the University of Ghana. His talk was titled, "The Yellow Fever Cure That Europe Forgot to Remember." Only 14 people attended. Sparks began to catch. Health justice activists started citing the Diarra papers. Journalists began whispering about ghost cures buried by colonial industries. A movement grew. Even the World Health Organization's African Bureau quietly reopened 2 case studies from the 1930s. One footnote. Field treatment in pre-independence Angola shows notable reduction in mortality. Identity of practitioner unlisted. Unlisted, but the people remembered. Maria Lemba died unknown, somewhere in the forest, according to oral tradition. It said she never fled Angola, never took a photograph, never taught in a classroom. But her treatment was so widely adopted by nearby villages that by 1940, death from yellow fever in the region was practically non-existent. 2 pharmaceutical companies, that fact was statistically anomalous. To the locals, it was memory. How many discoveries have we lost because someone decided the wrong hands held the right answers? How many Joos have disappeared before their names could echo? How many Marias cured villages that doctors couldn't find on maps? How many Diarras died watching their work rebranded, made European, all so the world could pretend it was civilized? ATN made sure Diarra's name was etched permanently on the official record, not buried in a footnote, not missing from a masthead, but marked. He once said, they treated Diarra's truth like wildfire. Not because it burned, but because it spread. We remember scientists who built laboratories from cement and glass. But what about the ones who built miracles from ash, soil, and survival? We cite patents, but we forget the people who taught the earth to fight back. And when those stories threaten the version of science that sells, they are cast into silence. This was the forgotten file. If this story stirred you, don't let it be buried again. Share their names. Share their truth. Like, comment, and subscribe for more voices lost to history and now found again.